I now call on our Chairman, Kelton Dennis, to introduce our speaker. Thank you.
Our guest speaker today is a strong advocate for the residential building industry. He is regularly engaged with government, regulators and the media to focus on improving housing affordability and providing access to a home for all Victorians. He was a lawyer for over 20 years, both in the private and public sectors, and worked on a wide range of legal matters before joining the Housing Industry Association 7 years ago. The title of his talk today is, "Will my builder finish my house?" Yes, they will, but talk to them. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Executive Director, Victoria of the Housing Industry Association, Mr. Keith Ryan.
Good afternoon, and maybe a little bit higher. Good afternoon, thank you very much. It's lovely to be here. Thank you for inviting me to present to you today. I'd just like to quickly also mention that wonderful speech by Alira. That was really, really, really great. I've got a wife who's been talking to me about actually getting involved in sponsoring with the Smith family. So I've got a bit more ammunition for her to consider. So thank you very much and congratulations on doing so well with your life. Thank you. As you've been told, I'm the Executive Director for the Housing Industry Association in Victoria. I should just briefly explain what HIA is and what we do. We're an industry association for businesses involved in the home building industry. Many of our members are home builders, and they can range from the companies like Metricon, Simmons, who you see quite frequently, through to the smaller mum and dad builders who might build 1 or 2 homes a year. But we also have as our members suppliers, contractors and consultants as well, who also provide services for the home building industry. We've been around for over 75 years, and in fact, I can probably just make out where we were roughly formed outside the MCG, I believe it was, just around that time. Our goal is to speak with a united voice on behalf of the home building industry and, importantly, help to get people into homes. And I'll talk more about why our members see that as so important shortly. We also do provide quality services to our members to help them run their businesses successfully. We have an apprentice program. We're heading up towards 1,000 apprentices, for which we're very proud. We also have programs for selling contracts, other stationery. We also provide training for our industry, and we also provide safety services and technical services. And these are all important for helping our members run their businesses successfully and finish the jobs they're working on. I should also stress, though, that HIA is a membership organisation, and we're not a regulator like the Victorian Building Authority or Consumer Affairs Victoria. We don't have the power to resolve disputes between our members and consumers, but we do have a code of ethics, and we do hear complaints about breaches or alleged breaches of that code. We also do spend a lot of time helping our members to improve their businesses and resolve their disputes if they have them, or their concerns of their customers. Today, what I want to do is talk to you a little bit about the current concerns that are out there about the state of the home building industry. It's no secret that the past few years have been extremely challenging for all of us, but also for the home building industry. You're probably all seeing every day media reports about a builder potentially going broke. Another one went into voluntary administration late yesterday. We're not yet sure exactly how many people will be affected, but it's continually happening. That said, a great frustration for me is that you'll see a story saying a builder, and usually at the moment, thankfully, it's a relatively small builder going into insolvency, and then they'll list all the builders who've been going broke over the last couple of years and creating an impression that there's a huge cohort of builders who are actually going broke. It's not quite right. That's causing a lot of confusion and unnecessary stress for a lot of people. So I appreciate that at the moment it's very stressful for clients due to this media reporting, and concern that the builders will not finish the jobs for them. And not unreasonably, clients who are unhappy about the status of their building job are seeking or demanding answers. And we sometimes get some of this action. Unfortunately, this morning I had a pretty nasty experience. I went out to see how things were going at our reception desk, and I noticed our receptionist, who's a lovely young lady, taking a phone call and getting abused by a customer, not a member of ours, on the phone. And the abuse was so loud, so aggressive. I was walking past, probably about 5-10 metres away. I could hear it. It was that aggressive. It was extraordinarily brutal, and the poor girl was actually crying. So I took the appropriate course of action, walked up, clunk, stopped the phone call. That sort of abuse is not acceptable. And as much as people are stressed and unhappy, there are certain standards of decency that have to be maintained. And as I'll explain as I talk today, you will get answers if you're a client. You just need to be patient. I'm hoping that that's a rare event. Certainly the receptionist assured me it was, but certainly I'd like to think that that's not going to happen too often. So what's led to all this? Well, there's been a number of challenges in recent years. First, it's important to appreciate that the home building industry did, whilst it remained operating during the COVID lockdowns and restrictions, actually was subject to quite a few restrictions. There was a common perception out there that because you could walk past a building site and see builders at work, that it was business as usual. To some extent that was partly true, but not entirely, and particularly for home builders from our segment of the industry who are building detached homes and lower rise developments. There were some very strict restrictions to ensure that the spread of COVID was controlled. That included things like only 5 workers on a site, when you could usually have quite a few more, but also, more importantly, you could only work on so many sites per week. Now, for some of the people working in the residential building industry, they might have a specialised job, like say fitting in a shower. They could theoretically do their 3rd job by lunchtime on Monday. That's their week gone, completely stopped. And so it did have a major impact. We found ourselves having to slow down jobs. Second, consumer demand changed. Things such as working from home, the move to regional Victoria, attempts to escape the Ring of Steel, dare I mention that, that all led to quite a big surge in demand for new homes, but also for renovations. There was also some government stimulus, which also added to that. But then the third consequence was that the COVID pandemic led to some supply challenges from around the world, which made the business of home building more expensive, but also, and this is really important to stress, much slower. We had real issues even as COVID was first hitting us back in March 2020, which seems like a long, long time ago. It's hard to believe it's less than 3.5 years. Our first sign of it was concern that China was not be supplying some of the materials we needed for building homes. We found some supplies became much more expensive, but even if they didn't become much more expensive, we did find that the amount being supplied slowed down, or the supply times slowed down. We also had some interesting events, like you might recall there was a boat stuck in the Suez Canal for a couple of weeks, might even have been a bit longer. They all contributed and built up. And so it became much harder for home builders to work on building homes because they had all these previous stresses, along with costs going up. And keep in mind, builders are generally subject to fixed price contracts, but more importantly, they had their supplies slowing down. And the most critical supply which was slowing down was labour. Building a home generally these days requires a number of different skilled workers. You have some of the classics, like of course the carpenter building a frame. You have the brickies, if you have a brick veneer house. But you also have a number of other specialist trades, everything from electricians to plumbers to waterproofers, and they all have to do their jobs in sequence. And if you find that there's a shortage of trades, it very quickly starts to slow down the building process. So what we found was that home building work slowed down dramatically, and many builders found themselves working under unprofitable contracts. So they found themselves not only losing money on jobs, but also having severe cash flow difficulties because their progress payments And generally for most home builders, they get 5, 6 progress payments over the life of a build. The gaps between these progress payments became longer. If a builder was building, say, in half a year, which used to be potentially possible, particularly for larger builders, they would get their payments every month. We found building periods blowing out to 12 months, 18 months, even longer sometimes. But you still had 6 payments. And they were payments which were fixed. You got a certain percentage of a fixed sum. Maybe some extra money being paid if there was variations. But essentially the builder was not only getting paid much more slowly, but the time value of money was also impacting on the true profitability of the business. So what this led to, of course, not surprisingly, was that some, and I want to stress once again, some home builders became insolvent and have had to shut their businesses. This continued this year, and I mentioned before we had one only yesterday, a relatively small one hopefully, but we did have one large one, which is Porter Davis Homes, which back in 31st of March, yes, that date seared into my mind, went into liquidation. I want to stress though, it is only a small percentage of builders who are currently going into insolvency. Yes, we'll continue to see some builders go broke. That happens as a natural course of any industry, and builders, unfortunately, by the nature of the industry, do tend to have a slightly higher percentage who fail, but we are hopefully going to get back to some more traditional patterns. I would at this point also, though, respond to a common complaint about builders. And here I'm talking about builders not just who build homes, sorry, for those who do other things, but also civil construction, large commercial, industrial and the like. There's a common complaint for builders Phoenix. And if you don't know what Phoenixing is, it's where a builder has a company, they let it go broke, and the next day they start another big company with the same assets usually, often the same people, and they're even sometimes brazen enough to have the same name and same trading address. This is true, it does happen for some builders, and it does happen for some other types of business. But I think it's important to understand that with home builders, there are some real controls that make that much more difficult. Home builders are reliant, with one limited exception, on the state government insurer giving them insurance for domestic building work. That insurance is mandatory before a building permit can be issued and the builder can start work. If a builder can't get that insurance, they effectively can't start legally home building projects. That insurance is controlled by the state government insurer, who has copped a bit of criticism by homeowners lately for being slow with processing payments. They're also slow at processing applications for new insurance, and they're also pretty tough. And they do look at the history of the people who come before them. So yes, there is Phoenixing in the home building, or say in the building industry, but for home building it's actually much more difficult. So when you hear complaints about, oh, a home builder is shut down, they'll be back next week running their business, the chances are that's actually not going to be the case. That builder's gone for at least a few years. Another challenge for home builders recently, which is added to that mix of extra supply, extra costs, delays, thank you very much, is of course the Reserve Bank of Australia. They have recently increased interest rates, and this has had a major impact on consumer willingness to enter into building contracts, but it's also reduced their capacity to borrow. Our members tell us that many consumers are waiting for interest rates to stabilise before they commit to signing a contract. The interest rate increases have also led to a number of projects being cancelled, and it's roughly 25–30% at times, or at least being deferred. I also cannot deny that the insolvencies over the last couple of years have led to some consumers thinking, is it worth building at the moment? And I can understand that. But after all that gloom and doom, let's be a bit more positive. In the longer term, there is good news for our industry. Victoria, as an entire state and economy, has proven to be extraordinarily resilient, and the population is starting to grow again. And regardless of what your political views are, or your views about migration, or your views about other matters, the reality is Victoria continues to grow. Melbourne continues to grow as a city. We're going to eventually become the biggest city again in Australia, a title that hasn't been held since the 1920s. And those people coming to Melbourne are going to need a home. Those homes will have to be built. There's going to be a debate over coming months and years about what sort of homes they get. Now, I'm from the HIA. I represent detached home builders, low-rise, medium-rise builders, not so much high-rise. So I have a vested interest to some extent to say, hopefully not too much high-rise, but I suspect most of our communities with us. We need to have a mixture of housing stock. We need to have lots of detached homes. We'll probably need to see an increasing percentage of medium density and lower density, and we will see some more apartments as well, high-rise. But it needs to be a mix. But there's going to be homes having to be built. And so for builders at the moment who are finding it tough, there is a silver lining. Things will get better. And I need to stress that Victorian builders are generally pretty resilient. Many of them have been around for a long time. They've managed many challenges in the past and will continue to do so in the future. I spend a lot of time talking to home builders, not surprisingly with my job. And while they often complain about red tape and governments, and I often hear this, who would be a builder? They're all still builders. They love it. They love building homes. And look, I've lost count of the number of times I've been told by a builder the thing they enjoy most about their job is handing over a completed house to a client. And in fact, it's really useful for you to appreciate that for builders, a happy client is critical to their continuing success as a builder. And a happy client is a client who has moved into a completed home. I should also point out, ironically, that some HIA members, in fact many of them, are so keen to finish building homes that they've started, but they'll keep on going even when we say maybe you should stop. We actually have members who are effectively clearly not going to get paid by their client. They should have worked that out, but they still will want to finish the job. They just don't want to stop. And even when you keep on pointing out that the client doesn't want you or they won't pay you, they'll keep on going. And it's not because they just want to get paid. They think if they finish the job, they'll get paid. It's also a degree of professional pride and desire to get the job done. I've even had clients who've said, oh, well, I designed this house. I don't want someone else to finish it. It's mine. I should finish it. There is a real sense of pride and joy in finishing off homes. And I think we can sometimes forget that. Home builders also understand that for a consumer, a home building contract is usually one of, if not the most important contracts they will ever sign. They also understand that from a client's perspective, that client's home building project is the most important home building project. Why wouldn't it be? It's your house, your home. And builders understand that and respect that. And it's really important. But at the same time, clients need to understand that builders are running a business. They need to make a reasonable profit, and they have to manage often more than one job at a time. A builder, and especially a home builder, is really a project manager, relying on a number of trades to complete the building work. This can be, at the best of times, quite difficult, as builders are generally quite picky about who they use on their jobs. They'll go with the trades that they know and trust, the ones who have done the right job from before. And if they have to wait or pay a bit more, they'll do that to make sure they get the job done correctly. But what it does mean is that sometimes you'll see jobs that seem to have stalled, because obviously building is a sequential process, and it can be just as much not for the builders having trouble, but because the builder's waiting for the right person to come along and get the job done. And we need to understand that we're not having the best of times at the moment. The surge in home building activity in recent years has led to trade availability reducing, and this has also slowed down home building projects. Home builders are really struggling to find trades, They're often going for the sun, heading up to Queensland, particularly after the floods year and a half ago, or they're going off to work on things like the big build, the big housing build, and maybe eventually the regional housing build and other projects. It can actually be quite hard for builders to find the right trades. So what you'll find is that jobs will seem to have slowed down or stalled because of that difficulty in sourcing the people to do the jobs. And it's really important to understand, but for the builder's perspective, they don't want this to happen. They want the job to be finished. After all, they want to be paid. And they also want to have that joy of getting their house handed over and moving on to the next job, the next challenge. My experience is that the best builders are not necessarily good on all the tools. They generally tend to be ex-carpenters or brickies. We get some from other areas, but that's probably the usual background. But the good ones, the ones who are really successful or who have been around for a while, are excellent at managing their trades and communicating with people and keeping their clients up to date and happy. But the last couple of years have really tested those skills to an extraordinary extent. And we're finding that more and more of our members are really struggling to keep their clients happy. And it's not necessarily because they're not doing the right thing, they're not paying their trades, not paying their suppliers, but they're just struggling to coordinate, juggle all the balls at the same time. And sometimes it's becoming a bit much. I've noticed with my membership a renewed interest in mental wellness in particular. It's become a bigger and bigger issue, as it has for all of society, and the building industry is no different. What we'll find is that builders are really, at this stage, almost at times going into their shells, and they need to be encouraged to get out and talk to people again. But they are doing it. We've got many reports of builders who've had situations where they've started the job, and keep in mind that for many jobs, particularly greenfield jobs, you might find the contract gets signed on day one, but you actually don't get to start building for another year or two. Obviously, even at the best of times, costs have gone up a bit, but now they've gone up dramatically. We've seen a lot of builders negotiate with clients and get their prices modified, and essentially the usual deal seems to be that the client's told, look, this is what I'm going to end up having to pay, this is what it will cost me, can we share the pain? And many clients are being reasonable and doing that. And some banks are also accepting that that's a reasonable outcome. And we're also getting clients being more reasonable about extensions of time and not claiming delay damages because of delays being caused by factors outside the control of the builder or the client. But despite all these challenges, the builders are generally getting the job done. They are finishing the homes off. We're now actually getting to the point with sales dropping off where we're seeing more homes completed than started. When Home Builder in particular started, that ratio completely blew out. We're now back where there's more homes being finished off than actually started. So we should start to see more trades become available to get the remaining houses finished off. So it is looking much better. So my advice to clients at the moment is to be patient and continue to talk to your builder. The builder wants and indeed needs to finish the house, but they're going through a tough time at the moment. A bit of patience from a client and understanding that the builder, along with the rest of the industry, is going through a difficult time will certainly help. Builders will respond. They may take a bit longer than they would like to at times because they're trying to get the answers for you, but they will respond, they will get back to you, they will finish your house. They just need a bit of patience, they need a bit of understanding. So in conclusion, my advice to a client who's concerned about the progress of their build is to make sure you talk to, but also listen to the builder. They might be a bit slow to respond, but they will generally respond. And you may not like the answer necessarily, because they'll say, I'm sorry, I'm waiting for supplies, or I'm waiting for this particular trade to become available, but they will give you an answer and they will get the house done. So if you're patient, give them a bit of understanding and listen, you will get your new home and the builder will have that pleasure and joy of having a handover. Thank you very much.
We have a few minutes for questions, which Keith has kindly agreed to take. So please wait for the microphone from the MC. Stand and clearly state your name before asking the question.
Hi, Jim Orchard's my name. Just a quick one. I worked in the commodity industry, and you're talking about delays. Can builders hedge their, if you're going to wait 2 years to get your supplies, there's some sort of, financial instruments they can put in place? Are people betting on the commodity market, or some of them can hedge it out?
Look, I'm sure some of the really big builders, particularly working in the commercial apartment space, are probably entering into those sorts of arrangements. But for most builders, even the companies like Metricon and Simmons, it's probably just not feasible to do that. So I don't believe that's generally possible, but there probably are some builders doing it, but it's not something we hear much about.
Keith, thank you very much. Robert Fisher is my name. We're all conscious of the extreme shortage of low economic houses, and I'm thinking of the empty office blocks that we see around the place, and I know that high-rise is not your area, and I appreciate that not all empty offices can be converted into low economic houses, but there are many that can be. Is this a role that any of your members would be interested in playing a part in?
Look, we do have some members who are involved in higher-rise developments, so certainly that is something where our members could be involved. I know that agencies like the Property Council of Australia, who I deal with sometimes, are looking at that, and it has happened before, not just here but also in other parts of the world. So I wouldn't be surprised if, yes, we see some offices being transformed into homes, which would have the benefit of not just ensuring that a building structure is not being wasted, but also give a bit more vibrancy to the city, because at the moment it's obviously finding it very tough, and a few more people living here would probably help quite a bit. So yes, I think that's going to be something we'll see more of.
Thanks. David Cram, my question is of a futuristic nature. Your talk put me in mind of the age when motor vehicles were made by hand using a variety of different craftsmen and women. So this question is, what do you consider, given that there are many, many different skills among the Rotary movement and many, many skills in the building industry, what do you think is the feasibility of a partnership, a long-term partnership, to create multi-storey modular homes made principally from recycled or even landfill materials?
Well, that sort of thing is actually already to some extent happening or starting to happen. I've been having some discussions with a couple of bodies who are actually involved as not-for-profits in building modular homes. And prefabrication in particular is probably going to be something which we'll see a lot more of. And it won't just be because of market demand, but it'll be because of that issue I mentioned before, lack of trades. The simple reality is we're probably going to see over time more and more houses being built almost like jigsaws. It's already happening to some extent. You go and look at, say, a place like Bunnings. You walk through a Bunnings, you can see modular kitchens there. Bathrooms. We're going to see that gradually expand. We've already got transportable homes being built by some companies. I think that's going to be an activity which will continue to grow. And yes, I would not be surprised if we see a lot of innovation with using recycled materials, because quite frankly, the materials are there, there'll probably be incentives to use them. So I would expect that, in fact, that's already happening to some extent, and I can't see why, when you consider the economic patterns and trends, why it wouldn't continue to happen.
Bruce Davidson, thanks for a very interesting and reassuring talk. My father was a builder. Going back 40, 50 years, the building inspector was a big shadow over the job, I can tell you that. Now, all that's been sort of contracted out, privatised, etc. How does it work? Is it working well, or is it not as good as it used to be?
Yeah, look, you're talking about private certification. At the moment, if you're having a house or home built for you, you don't just have a builder engaged, you also have a person called a building surveyor engaged. Traditionally, until about the 90s, that was done by a council employee, a municipal building surveyor. In the 90s and this is part of the Kennett reforms, we saw some privatisation in response to the fact that the councils were extraordinarily slow and at times, dare I say, arguably corrupt in issuing permits and doing inspections. We've gone to another direction with private certification, and I should stress that HI has a very strong policy that we support private certification as being a necessary process. But that doesn't mean that there doesn't need to be controls. There has been changes over the years. For example, about 6-7 years ago, the law was changed to make it very clear that the owner had to choose the building surveyor. The builder couldn't say to a client, you will use this building surveyor. In practice, clients will still generally choose who the builder suggests, but the client does have the option and it is enforced. We're also seeing building surveyors who are professionals in their own right being much more careful about making sure they do their job properly. And one common bit of feedback we get is actually from our members is that they prefer building surveyors who aren't afraid to tell them, fix this, you've got this wrong. And in fact, we've had more of an issue in the last few years with building surveyors probably becoming almost too much of a source of information for builders, giving them guidance, answering their questions in general, even though they've got a strict regulatory role. And it can be quite complicated when you're a builder who's used to using a building surveyor, you've got a question, you want to know what the answer is about say how the National Construction Code applies in a certain circumstance. If that person's also certifying your work, they probably shouldn't be giving you advice on that same project. But from our members' perspective, often they say, well, they're the expert. Why shouldn't I ask them? I can get the right information. They actually want to get it right. Because ultimately, the builders are usually the ones who get sued if the work isn't compliant or doesn't comply with the contract. So there's a powerful incentive. That said, I should acknowledge there are criticisms of private certification. There's a view that private certifiers are captive to builders, particularly bigger builders. I think that fear is overstated, though I acknowledge that it can happen sometimes. I think, though, in the last few years there's been a number of reforms to try and ensure building surveyors stay separate. Those reforms are still going through at the moment, but I would expect that they would settle most of that down. That said, clients have the right to choose the council building surveyor if they want it. One caveat, where does the council find their building surveyor? The answer is often they can't, and that's why we still have private certification.
Thank you, Keith, for fascinating and in-depth information for us. On behalf of the club, I'd like to offer you this small token of gift socks and a copy of our club history. It's a pair of limited edition socks. They are 2023 Rotary Convention socks, 200% Australian made, in Preston by our very own past president, Phil Endersby's Wilderness Wear. Thank you very much, Keith.
Thank you very much.
In closing, I'd like to thank all of our visitors and guests for attending. Thanks also to our MC, Adrian Nelson, and for reflection, Barbara Eurondis. Thank you also, a special thank you to our lunch setup and reception teams for the weekly effort in making this meeting happen.